Hello, everyone, welcome back to the channel World Conflict Monitor. Please subscribe and like my videos. Today, we dive into one of the most heated geopolitical dramas currently unfolding in Eastern Europe. The growing crisis inside Belarus and the question shaking the region: is Russian President Vladimir Putin finally cutting ties with his longtime ally Alexander Lukashenko? For years, Belarus and Russia have been locked together in a partnership that often looked unbreakable, but the current turmoil suggests a shift might be taking place. To break this down for you, we will look at the situation through an unusual but effective framework, like reviewing a vehicle. We will explore the exterior, interior, performance, safety features, unique selling points, price, and finally come to our conclusion. So buckle up, because this is going to be a comprehensive deep dive into the Belarus crisis. When we look at the exterior of Belarus today, the picture is turbulent, loud, and visibly unstable. Protests, economic struggles, and political unrest have become the face of the country. Since the controversial 2020 election, Lukashenko's government has faced a never-ending wave of opposition from its citizens who accuse him of stealing power. On the outside, Belarus appears as a state tightly controlled, yet visibly cracking under pressure. International observers see the exterior as worn down, battered by sanctions, and dented by the lack of international recognition. This car, if you imagine it, looks old and used from the outside, patched together with propaganda and police crackdowns. The exterior branding of Belarus, once called the last dictatorship in Europe, has not improved. Instead, the name has become even more notorious, a country viewed as Moscow's satellite, whose sovereignty is often questioned. The visible cracks, much like dents on a car's body, symbolize years of dependency on Russia and increasing isolation from the West. Now, when we go deeper into the interior of Belarus, and this is where the analysis must be larger and more detailed, we see the true complexity of the crisis. Inside the country, Lukashenko maintains a tight grip over institutions, media, and military, but the mood among ordinary Belarusians tells a very different story. The interior is filled with resentment, suppressed anger, and fear. Workers, students, professionals, many of them dream of a life integrated with Europe, with freedoms, democratic governance, and opportunities. However, what they live in is a system where dissent is met with arrest, censorship, or exile. The Belarusian interior is designed to feel controlled and suffocating. Imagine sitting inside a car where the windows are locked, the air is stale, and the doors cannot be opened. This is how the citizens feel inside Lukashenko's Belarus. Economically, the interior is also falling apart. Inflation, energy shortages, and lack of Western investment have created cracks in the social fabric. The younger generation is increasingly disconnected from the government narrative and relies on social media and underground networks to express itself. Meanwhile, Lukashenko's reliance on Moscow is deeply felt inside the country. Russian language, Russian media, and Russian financial aid penetrate every level of life. This makes Belarusians feel as though their country is merely a province of Russia rather than an independent state. At the same time, there is growing resentment about this dependency. The opposition has been vocal, saying that Belarus risks losing its identity and independence if it continues being fully tied to Putin's Kremlin. So the interior may look controlled, but it is crumbling inside with deep contradictions, suppressed freedoms, and a population eager for change. This makes it a pressure cooker, a ticking time bomb that can explode at any moment. Turning to performance, Belarus under Lukashenko has been struggling to deliver. Performance here means how the state actually functions in terms of economy, governance, and international influence. Unfortunately, Belarus is performing like an old, outdated engine that constantly breaks down. The economy is heavily dependent on Russian subsidies, cheap oil, and gas imports. When Russia faces its own crisis, Belarus feels the shockwaves instantly. Performance also fails when we examine foreign policy. Instead of steering the car forward with independent decisions, Lukashenko has had to follow the path chosen by Moscow. His government's role in Russia's war in Ukraine, allowing Russian troops to use Belarusian territory, further damaged the country's international standing. Instead of being seen as a neutral or sovereign player, Belarus is now viewed as complicit in Moscow's aggression. On top of this, sanctions from the European Union and the United States have crippled Belarusian industries, particularly the export of potash fertilizers, which were once a lifeline for the economy. Performance-wise, Belarus is a vehicle that cannot accelerate on its own. It struggles to climb uphill and requires constant pushes from Russia to even move forward. For the people inside, the lack of performance translates into rising costs of living, fewer opportunities, and isolation from the global economy. Safety features are almost non-existent in this political vehicle. In normal democracies, safety features include independent courts, freedom of press, rule of law, and institutions that protect citizens from the abuse of power. In Belarus, these features are stripped away. Instead, the safety is inverted. The government uses police, intelligence agencies, and the army not to protect citizens, but to protect the regime itself. Protesters face harsh crackdowns. Independent journalists are silenced. Political opponents are jailed or forced into exile. For average Belarusians, there are no airbags, no seatbelts, no safety nets, just the threat of punishment. Even economically, the safety features are weak. The government has no strong financial buffers to protect citizens from sanctions or global shocks. Ordinary people suffer the most while elites close to Lukashenko continue to live with privilege. If a country is like a car, Belarus is one where the brakes are controlled by one man alone, and everyone else is forced to sit in silence as passengers, unable to stop the crash. This lack of safety fuels fear and discontent, leading to a sense that change is not only desired but necessary for survival. Unique selling points once existed for Belarus. Historically, Belarus marketed itself as a stable, disciplined state with strong ties to both East and West. For years, Lukashenko played a balancing game, resisting full integration with Russia, while also avoiding full confrontation with the West. This made Belarus unique. It was a buffer zone, a bridge between Moscow and Europe. However, that selling point has now been lost. Since 2020, and especially since the war in Ukraine began, Belarus has been completely aligned with Russia, abandoning its balancing act. Another unique selling point was the perception of safety and order compared to chaotic neighbors. Belarus used to look orderly, with little crime and functioning infrastructure, but that order now feels like repression, and the selling point has turned into a liability. Belarus no longer has much to offer independently. It does not attract foreign investment, it does not act as a diplomatic broker, and its reputation has declined significantly. What remains is the perception of loyalty to Russia, but this is not unique, it is dependence. If Belarus had unique selling points in the past, they have been eroded by Lukashenko's refusal to reform and by his reliance on Putin. When it comes to price, the cost of this political arrangement is extremely high. For the people, the price is paid in terms of lost freedoms, isolation, and economic hardship. Families see their children leaving the country for better opportunities abroad. Professionals cannot work freely. Businesses are suffocated under sanctions. For Lukashenko, the price is paid in political legitimacy. He is seen as a dictator clinging to power, dependent entirely on Moscow for survival. For Putin, the price is also high. Maintaining Lukashenko's regime costs billions in subsidies, loans, and military assistance, at a time when Russia is already spending enormously on its war in Ukraine. Keeping Belarus afloat adds to the burden. This makes the price tag of the alliance increasingly unbearable. Moreover, the price also comes in terms of strategic risks. If Belarus collapses, or if the population rises against Lukashenko, Moscow risks losing one of its last buffers against NATO. The price is therefore not just economic, but also geopolitical. Both leaders are trapped in a costly arrangement that is draining them while offering little in return. In conclusion, the crisis in Belarus and the question of whether Putin is cutting ties with Lukashenko can be seen as a breaking point. The exterior shows a battered, dented state under visible stress. The interior reveals deep anger, suffocating control, and a society desperate for change. Performance has failed, safety features are missing, unique selling points are gone, and the price of maintaining this alliance is becoming unbearable for both Minsk and Moscow. The truth is that Putin may not immediately cut ties with Lukashenko. He still needs Belarus as a strategic territory for his war in Ukraine and as a buffer against NATO. But the relationship is no longer strong. It is like a car that has been driven too hard for too long, still moving, but one breakdown away from disaster. For Belarusians, the hope remains that one day they will be able to redesign this vehicle, install real safety features, boost its performance, and finally take the wheel themselves. Until then, the crisis continues, and the world is watching closely to see if Putin will abandon Lukashenko or keep pouring resources into a regime that may not survive the road ahead.